Hello and welcome to the 11th Annual Hatfield House Chamber Music Festival. My name is Guy Johnston and I'm the Artistic Director for the festival. We are about to go into one of our schools concerts where today over 500 children will listen to 4 musical stories performed by the Purcell School for Young Musicians, directed by Paul Hoskins and illustrated by author and artist James Mayhew from his book Once Upon a Tune. You are about to hear and see dramatic stories of trolls flying carpets at magic spells which inspired some wonderful pieces of music like The Sorcerer's Apprentice and the William Tell Overture. I am thrilled that we can offer this concert as part of our education and outreach programme during this weekend of live music at Hatfield House. We hope you enjoy the concert.
Good afternoon everyone and welcome. We're going to hear some amazing music this afternoon. And I've been so fortunate to listen to the rehearsals and the first performance with this fantastic orchestra. You are in for such a treat. Lots of music has been based on myths and stories, legends and fairy tales. So today we're going to hear 4 pieces which have been inspired by fabulous tales. We're going to begin with The Sorcerer's Apprentice, which takes place in an old castle in Germany hundreds of years ago. And in this castle there lived a sorcerer who's like a kind of wizard. And he had lots of hard work to do and he needed somebody to help him. So he found a young boy in the town who would come and live in the castle and do some of the tasks for him. Now this young boy was very excited. He thought, I'm going to learn magic. But when he got to the castle, he was disappointed because all he had to do was the boring things like cleaning and tidying and sweeping and dusting. But one day the wizard said he was going out for the whole day and he left a long list of jobs for the boy to do. Once he'd gone, the boy looked at the list and his heart sank. All the usual boring things were there, including filling the cauldron, which was a huge, great big bowl, with water from the river, a really hard job. But then the boy saw the wizard had left behind his book of spells. The boy opened the book, flicked through the pages and found a spell that could bring anything to life. He said the magic words and cast the spell on a broomstick, which came to life. It grew legs and arms. And the boy said, go to the river, fetch water and pour it into the cauldron. The little broom ran off and did as it was told. The boy rested in a chair, but soon the cauldron was full and overflowing. You can stop now, he said to the broom. But the broom didn't stop, because stopping had never been part of the spell. The broom kept on going to the river and bringing more and more water into the castle. Soon it was up to his knees, up to his waist. And the boy said, please, stop. But the broom wouldn't. In the end, the boy took an axe and chopped the broom in half. Surely that will stop the spell, he said. But it didn't. Both halves of the broom grew legs and arms. Both had buckets. Both ran down to the river fetching water, which was now coming into the castle twice as fast. The boy began to think that maybe the whole world would be flooded, and he wished he'd never touched the book of spells. Just then, there at the door was the sorcerer, and he was very angry. He waved his arms and magicked away all the water. Everything was back to how it was to start with. He gave the bucket to the boy and said, now you must start from the beginning. You must go to the river, fetch water, pour it into the cauldron, all by yourself, without any magic. So now we're going to hear a piece of music called The Sorcerer's Apprentice by the composer Paul Dukas. So for our next piece, we go far away back in time, 1,000 years, to an ancient city called Baghdad, where there lived a very angry king, or sultan, as kings there are called. Now this sultan or king was very angry because his wife had betrayed him. She had broken his heart by falling in love with somebody else. So the sultan sent her off to the executioner, and that was the end of her. And then he made a new law. He said, I will marry a new wife each day. And the next day, I will send her to the executioner before I marry another new wife. And so on, every single day. That way, no woman will ever have time to break my heart again. Well, of course, all the women in Baghdad were terrified. None of them wanted to marry this sultan. All except for one woman. And her name was Scheherazade. And she said, I will marry the sultan. And she went to the palace and said to him, I will be your bride. And he was very pleased because Scheherazade was beautiful. But she was also very clever. And that night she began to tell such extraordinary and wonderful stories that the sultan stayed awake all night listening to every word. And when morning came and the executioner appeared at the palace door, Scheherazade had not finished her stories. And the sultan said, you must tell me what happens at the end. And she said, alas, the executioner is waiting. And so the sultan thought and said, you may live one more night. So the next night she continued and told more and more and more stories. Better and better each story was. Now some of the stories you will have heard of, things like Aladdin and his magic lamp, Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, and perhaps Sinbad the sailor, who features in the music we're going to hear next. Sinbad was a very famous character who had lots of adventures at sea. My favourite is when he and his friends on the ship were looking for an island. They needed some food and they were looking for some fruit trees or something they could eat. At last they saw a small green island and they made a camp there. And they took fruit from the trees and they lit a fire to keep warm. But suddenly the ground began to shake and they realised it wasn't an island. They'd lit a fire on the back of a sea monster who rose up out of the water and threw them all into the sea. This is just one of Scheherazade's many tales. In fact, she told stories for 1,001 nights, which is a long time. And then the Sultan said, I give up my stupid law. You have proved to me how wise and wonderful and brilliant and clever women are. From now on you will sit as my equal, my queen, and we will have all your stories written into a great book, which we will call The 1001 Arabian Nights, which is a real famous book. You'll be able to find it in the library if you look. So now we're going to hear a wonderful piece of music. It's called Scheherazade, the Sea and Sinbad Ship, and it's by Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov. Now we're off to Norway for another story, and this is called In the Hall of the Mountain King. I promise you'll know this tune, it's really famous. And it comes from a bigger story called Per Gynt. So in this story, Per Gynt is a very naughty young man. He gets into lots of trouble, tells lots of fibs, annoys his mother, irritates everybody in the town where he lives. So in the end, he goes up into a mountain to sulk. He thinks, well, if I stay in the mountain long enough, people will miss me and they'll come and look for me. And he waited and no one came. And he began to think, oh, maybe everybody really does hate me. Just then he sees a beautiful girl dressed all in green. She's a bit odd because she's got green hair and green skin. But she says, I'll be your friend. In fact, I'll marry you. And if you marry me, you'll get lots of treasure because my father is a king. Well, Per Gynt liked the sound of the treasure. So he followed the girl into a deep, dark cave. And there in the cave sat her father, the Mountain King, on a throne made of treasure. He was, of course, the king of the trolls, and she was the troll princess. The Troll King said, if you want to marry my daughter, you must become a troll. And Per Gynt said, well, how do I do that? And the king said, first, you must promise to be wicked and never wash again. Easy, said Per Gynt. I hate having baths. Everyone thinks I'm wicked anyway. But what else do I need to do to become a troll? The Mountain King said, the last thing you need to do is grow a tail. How do I do that, said Per Gynt. I don't like the idea of it. In fact, I've changed my mind. I don't think I want to marry your daughter. You can keep your treasure. I don't want to be a troll. And he tried to run out of the cave, but found himself surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of trolls who said to the king, if he's not a troll, he's a human. And trolls eat humans. And they all began to chase him faster and faster and faster, as you'll hear in this brilliant piece of music. So here is In the Hall of the Mountain King from Per Gynt by Grieg. So I'm afraid, my friends, we've come to the last piece of music for today, and it's a wonderful piece. At the end, there's another famous tune you're bound to recognise. This is called William Tell. It's a story of a great hero who once lived in Switzerland. And in Switzerland, they had a big problem because long ago, hundreds of years ago, they were invaded by another country, by Austria, led by a wicked man called Gessler. And he made life very difficult for the people in Switzerland. He took all their money, soon they were starving, and they were desperate for somebody to help them. And the only person they could think of was William Tell, because he was the best person at shooting arrows with a crossbow. People said he'd never once missed a target. And they said to him, "Can you help us? Can you train us up? Can you teach us to fire arrows so we can chase out the Austrians?" Meanwhile, Gessler, to punish the Swiss people more, put his hat on a tall pole in the town and said, "Anybody who passes my hat must bow to it to show respect." But when William Tell and his son walked through the town, they did not bow. And Gessler caught them and said, "I've heard that you're very good at shooting arrows. Let's find out how good." And he tied William Tell's son to a tree and made William Tell walk about 100 metres. He put an apple on his son's head and said to William Tell, "You must shoot the apple off your own son's head with an arrow." Now William Tell said, "I can't do that, it's too scary. What if I miss and hurt my son?" Gessler said, "It's either that or you die." So William Tell picked up his crossbow. His hand shook, but lots of people had gathered round and they all said, "Come on, William Tell, you can do it. We believe in you." And even his son said, "I trust you, father." So he took aim, he fired his arrow, it flew across the town square, and it sliced the apple right down the middle in two perfect halves. And everyone cheered because William Tell had made a fool of Gessler. Gessler didn't like that. He said, "Well, I'm going to put you in my dungeon anyway." And he put William Tell on a boat to carry him across a lake to the other side where his dungeon was. Now in Switzerland there are high mountains and deep lakes, and often you get storms, and that's what happened next. A big storm blew down on this lake, and the only person who was clever enough to steer the boat to safety was William Tell. So Gessler had to untie William Tell because he was tied up. So he guided the boat to safety and then dived into the lake and escaped. And then he ran up into the mountains with his son, and they called all the Swiss people together with all their swords and shields and bows and arrows, and they ran down the mountain and they chased out the Austrians for good. And so Switzerland became a free country again, and everybody celebrated the great hero, William Tell, who is remembered in this piece of music we're going to hear now. It is in 4 sections. The first describes the sadness of the Swiss people. The next piece is a storm, just like the one in the story, with lots of thunder and lightning. Then we hear a description of the beautiful countryside, birdsong, that sort of thing. And last of all, we hear a very, very, very famous tune, one of the most famous tunes ever written, which describes William Tell and the Swiss chasing the Austrians out of their country. So here is the William Tell Overture by Gioacchino Rossini.